New tonight, 3 Texas judges are asking President Joe Biden to stop a controversial immigration bill from going into effect. In a letter posted on social media, the county executives from Harris, El Paso, and Travis counties claim the measure is unconstitutional. Senate Bill 4, which passed the state house, would give local police the ability to arrest migrants who cross the border illegally and gives judges the power to deport violators. Supporters of Senate Bill 4 say authority is needed in Texas due to federal inaction. But as KLTV 7's Nomi Sanchez explains, many advocates and others in the Latino community have concerns if it's signed into law.
Worried. That is the sentiment Paulina Pedrosa, a citizenship teacher for immigrants in Tyler, shared regarding SB 4.
Yes, I work very closely with our immigrant community on a daily basis, and my community is worried about what is going on.
The bill would make it a state crime to enter Texas illegally from Mexico and allow Texas police officers to arrest and deport anyone they suspect of entering the U.S. illegally.
It's taking the right from the federal government, which has the right under the Constitution to deal with immigration issues or enforcement, and giving it to the state.
East Texas Senator Brian Hughes, a sponsor of this bill, expresses the shift in power is necessary.
And so we can take those people into custody in a Texas court, not turn them over to the feds, but keep them in the Texas system and hold them accountable for that.
Hispanic community advocates fear this change could lead to an increase in racial profiling.
What does that look like? If you can't speak English, is that going to be a first sign that you're not here legally? If you're dark?
The bill would also increase the minimum sentence from 2 years to 10 years for smuggling immigrants into the state. Due to the vague language of the legislation, it's raised questions on whether family members transporting undocumented family members locally could also be prosecuted.
If me or you or take our cousins that might not have legal status and we're going to Dallas for a weekend to a concert or something and we get stopped for whatever reason, my tail light is out, they could take them. They could arrest them under this statute for being here unlawfully, and they could probably arrest me for trafficking these immigrants.
Senator Hughes says this is not the goal of SB 4, and arrests would all come down to probable cause.
The focus of this bill is people crossing the border illegally into the U.S. Obviously, my complexion, my accent, that does not create probable cause. It takes more than that.
Now, Governor Abbott is expected to sign the bill by the end of this month. Immigration advocacy group ACLU has already said they're going to file a lawsuit on this bill if it's passed. Nomi Sanchez, KLTV 7 News.
And Senator Hughes also added the state has set aside $100 million to help local police departments carry out these new duties if it is passed.